The zipper sound was louder than I expected. Sharp. Final. Like it was sealing something far bigger than a suitcase. I remember staring at my clothes. Not just fabric, but fragments of a life. The blue dress I wore on our 5th anniversary, when Peter made pasta from scratch because he'd burned the steaks. The sweater that still smelled faintly of his cologne, cedarwood, and something I could never name. I folded them carefully, almost tenderly, as if saying goodbye to pieces of myself. The house was too quiet. Even the clock on the kitchen wall seemed to tick slower, embarrassed to make noise. There was no shouting, no fight, just a silence so deep it felt like gravity. For months, maybe years, I'd been living beside Peter like a ghost, a polite, invisible version of myself. We still shared a bed, but it felt more like a divided continent than a marriage. He'd fall asleep scrolling through emails, while I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, counting all the words we'd stopped saying. I used to think marriages ended with explosions, with betrayal or screaming or someone slamming the door. But ours was dying in whispers, in unfinished sentences, in the space between 2 coffee cups that never met in the morning anymore. I wasn't angry, not really, just empty. The kind of empty that makes you forget your own voice. As I folded another shirt, a small memory caught me off guard. Peter laughing in the rain, that wild spring afternoon when our car broke down on the way to a friend's wedding. We danced by the roadside, soaked and ridiculous, and for a moment, it felt like the world was ours. That version of us, that messy, beautiful, hopeful pair, had somehow dissolved between bills, work deadlines, and quiet dinners eaten in front of separate screens. The suitcase was almost full when I paused and looked around. Every corner of the room carried a memory. The dent on the wall from when we tried to hang that absurdly heavy mirror, the candle wax on the dresser from the night we promised to stop taking each other for granted. Promises. So easy to make when your heart is still awake. A soft breeze came through the window, brushing my face. For a second, I thought I heard Peter's laugh again. Not the recent polite one he gave at dinner parties, but the deep, careless one from before. I almost smiled. Almost. The phone buzzed. A message from him. Working late again. Don't wait up. I stared at it. Not angry, just unsurprised. That's what distance looks like when it stops being a tragedy and becomes routine. So I zipped the suitcase completely this time. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Just that hollow sound again, the sound of something ending. I didn't plan to leave dramatically. I wasn't running towards someone new or chasing a grand dream. I just needed to breathe somewhere I didn't feel invisible. When I walked to the living room, the reflection in the window startled me. I looked older than I felt, not in years, but in weight, like every unspoken word had settled on my shoulders. That's when I realized something that hurt more than leaving ever could. I hadn't been angry at Peter for drifting away. I'd been angry at myself for letting him, for waiting too long to say, "Look at me, I'm still here," for pretending I was fine when I wasn't, for mistaking silence for peace. The headlights outside made patterns on the floor, familiar ones. Peter's car. He was home early. I froze, suitcase by my side. The keys jingled at the door, and for a split second, I considered running upstairs, hiding it, pretending this moment wasn't real. But I didn't. I stood there, my heart thudding in my throat, as the door opened. He stepped in, his eyes tired but kind, and then he saw it. The suitcase. He didn't speak. Neither did I. The air between us thickened with everything we'd left unsaid. And that's where everything began to change. But before go ahead, give me a minute, and if you've ever felt invisible in your own marriage, or if this story already touched something deep inside you, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Possible Hearts. I want to know where you're watching from, your city, your story, your heart, because what comes next might remind you of something you've forgotten about love. He saw the suitcase first, then me. For a moment, he just stood there, like someone who walked into a dream they weren't supposed to see. His hand still on the doorknob, keys dangling loosely between his fingers. Layla. His voice was careful, like he was testing the temperature of the air. I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on him. Not angry, not pleading, just tired. The silence between us felt alive. It had a pulse, a heartbeat, a memory. It had been there for years, sitting quietly between our words, waiting for this exact night. He took one step closer, eyes on the suitcase. "You're going somewhere?" That question, so small, so late. I said softly. "I don't know anymore." He nodded. The kind of nod that isn't agreement, just surrender. Then the tiniest flicker of pain crossed his face, gone before it could fully form. I could almost hear my own heartbeat, and under it, echoes of laughter, faint like an old tape playing in another room. Flashback. 3 years ago, a Sunday morning. Peter in the kitchen, barefoot, humming something by Fleetwood Mac. Pancakes burning slightly because he always forgot to flip them on time. Me teasing him, pretending to be the responsible one. We danced between the counters, his hands sticky with syrup, my cheeks hurting from smiling. That version of him, of us, felt like sunlight trapped in a bottle. The memory faded. The kitchen now was dark and cold. He moved closer, sitting on the arm of the couch across from me. "You could have told me." I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but because the irony was too sharp. "I did," I whispered. "Not like this, not all at once, but I did." He looked at me, confused. "When?" "When I stopped asking how your day was. When I went to bed before you came home. When I stopped trying to make you laugh." His shoulders dropped. His gaze fell to the floor. In that moment, I didn't see a husband. I saw a man who finally realized the language he'd never learned. The one made of glances, sighs, and silence. He said, "I thought you were just tired," almost to himself. I was. Pause. Just not in the way you thought. There was so much I wanted to say about the nights I sat in the car outside our house, trying to convince myself to walk in. About the mornings when I'd pour 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then pour one down the sink. about how loneliness feels heavier when there's someone beside you. But I didn't. Because saying it now felt cruel. Because I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or to the ghost of us. Another memory surfaced, this one smaller, almost fragile. It was a winter evening. I'd baked his favorite lemon pie for no reason. He came home late, saw it on the counter, smiled faintly, said, "You shouldn't have," and went straight to his laptop. I'd stood there for a while, knife in hand, waiting for him to notice the candles, the effort, the quiet hope. He didn't. So I blew them out myself. That night was when the silence started growing teeth. Back in the present, Peter rubbed his temples. "I didn't mean to make you feel invisible," I finished for him. He looked up, startled. "Yes," he said quietly. "Invisible." Something in me softened. Not forgiveness, not yet. Just a small recognition. He wasn't a villain. He was just lost, the same way I was. "You used to see me, even in a crowd. You always did." He met my eyes then. "And now?" I swallowed. "Now, you look at me like a photograph you've already memorized." The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was almost fragile, like the space between breaths. He stood up, walked to the suitcase, and touched the handle gently. Then quietly, he asked, "Would you stay if I asked you to?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because the question itself broke something inside me. He took a deep breath, then nodded, like he already knew the answer. He said finally, "I'm sorry. For everything I didn't notice. For every time I thought we were fine because you didn't say we weren't." His voice cracked just slightly, and that tiny fracture felt more real than any apology could. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the warmth of a tear trace down my cheek. In the distance, I heard rain starting against the window. Soft, hesitant, like the world was trying to listen in. When I opened my eyes again, he was still standing there, his hand on the suitcase, looking at me like he was afraid to blink. I wanted to tell him it wasn't too late, that love doesn't vanish. It just waits in the dark, hoping we'll turn the light back on. But my throat wouldn't move. So instead I said, "Peter, I don't know if I'm staying tonight." He nodded slowly, eyes shining. "Then let me at least drive you, wherever you're going." The kindness in that offer undid me completely. Because after all the distance, all the walls, he still cared enough to make sure I wouldn't leave alone. I almost said yes. Almost. But then I saw the photo on the shelf, our wedding day, my head against his chest, his hand resting over mine. We looked so sure back then, so certain that forever was something you could build once and never lose. And I realized maybe this was the only way to find each other again, by losing what we'd become. I took a step towards him, my hand brushed his arm, his breath hitched just slightly. I said, "I'll let you know." He nodded, once. I picked up my bag. "Layla," he started, but his voice broke halfway through my name. I turned, waiting. He didn't say anything else, just stared, like there were 1,000 words caught in his throat, all fighting to get out. But he said none of them. So I walked to the door. My fingers touched the handle, and then he said my name again, softer this time. "Layla." It wasn't the voice of a man begging. It was the voice of someone who had just woken up, dazed,
unsure of how long he'd been asleep. For a second, I stood frozen by the door, the handle cold against my palm. The air between us felt thick, as if the house itself didn't want me to let go. I thought of all the things we'd built together, and all the ways we'd quietly let them crumble. We met on a rainy Tuesday. I was late for work. He was holding a broken umbrella. He offered to share it anyway, which made no sense. The thing was half collapsed, barely hanging on. But that was Peter, always trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, even when it meant getting soaked in the process. He used to laugh about that day. "You looked like a storm pretending to be a woman," he'd say. And I'd reply, "You looked like a man who thought duct tape could save the world." We were a mess, but we were our mess. In the first years of our marriage, everything was small. Our apartment, our budget, our problems. We used to eat takeout on the floor, using moving boxes as tables. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And at the time, that felt infinite. There was one night, I still remember, when the power went out. We lit candles and danced in the living room to a song playing faintly from my phone. He held me close, whispering, "Even if we lose everything, I'll always find you in the dark." That version of him, of us, still lives somewhere in my bones. Then came the loss. We'd been trying for 2 years. When I finally got pregnant, it felt like a miracle we didn't dare speak too loud. For 12 weeks, everything felt fragile, but full of light. Then suddenly, it wasn't. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and heartbreak. He sat beside me, holding my hand, but I don't think either of us really knew how to grieve. He shut down, I shut down differently. And from that day on, there was always something unspoken between us, a grief that never found its words, a crack in the foundation we tried to pretend wasn't there. I used to believe love could heal anything. Now I know love needs space to breathe, and we stopped giving it air. Back in the present, Peter still hadn't moved. He was watching me like he was afraid one wrong word would make me disappear. I said something suddenly. "Do you remember that night the lights went out?" He blinked, startled. "What?" "That night, we danced in the dark. You said you'd always find me there." He looked down, his voice barely audible. "I thought I did." That broke something in me, not in anger, but in sadness, because he believed it. And maybe, once upon a time, I did too. I set the suitcase down, just for a moment. My fingers ached from gripping the handle too tightly. He walked a few steps closer, not too close, just enough to let me feel his presence again. He said, "I know I've been blind. I kept telling myself we were fine, that it was just a phase, but I see now that I stopped really looking at you." His words were quiet but heavy, like raindrops that had been gathering on the edge of a storm. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw not the man who disappointed me, but the man who'd tried, the man who'd once made me feel seen, before life made us both tired. I saw something in him, that desperation, not for happiness, but for understanding. Maybe that's where healing begins, in the moment you realize you both stopped trying to win and started trying to understand. The clock ticked again. A car passed outside. Somewhere, the night deepened. I picked up my suitcase once more, not out of decision, but out of instinct. I wasn't sure if I'd stay or go. All I knew was that the space between us felt different now. Still fragile, but no longer empty. And as I reached for the door again, Peter's voice broke the silence. He said, "Layla, I need to tell you something before you go."
I turned back slowly. Peter was standing near the table, his hands trembling slightly, and that alone scared me more than the thought of leaving. He wasn't the kind of man who trembled. "What did you find?" I asked. He hesitated, then walked to the old sideboard against the wall, the one we'd bought secondhand during our first year in this house. The drawer squeaked when he opened it, a tired, familiar sound. He reached inside and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. "I was looking for the warranty on the coffee machine," he said, almost smiling through the sadness, "and I found this instead." He held it up, carefully, like something fragile. "I wrote it years ago," he whispered, "and I never gave it to you." Something in my chest shifted. Curiosity, fear, disbelief. He offered the letter, but I didn't take it right away. The air between us felt electric, heavy with everything we hadn't said. Finally, I reached out. The paper was soft at the edges, creased like it had been read 100 times, or maybe handled 100 times by a man who never had the courage to deliver it. "Why didn't you give it to me?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes clouded. "Because I thought you didn't need it anymore." I almost laughed, but the kind of laugh that hurts. "Peter, I needed everything." I unfolded the letter slowly. His handwriting, steady but rushed, filled the page. It began with a date, April 17th, 2015. 10 years ago. That was the year after we lost the baby, the year the world dimmed. I began to read, "Layla, I don't know how to talk to you anymore without breaking you. You sit across from me at dinner, quiet but strong. I know you think I don't see you, but I do. I see the way your hands shake when you hold your coffee cup, the way you smile for me even when it hurts. You keep trying to carry us both, and I keep letting you. I don't know how to fix this, but I love you, even when I can't reach you, even when I don't deserve you. Peter." By the time I reached the end, my vision blurred. The paper trembled in my hands. For years, I'd believed I was the only one hurting in silence. But maybe we both were. I looked up. Peter was watching me like he didn't know if he was allowed to breathe. "You wrote this 10 years ago?" I said softly. He nodded. "And you never gave it to me?" He looked down. "I thought it was too late. You were so distant back then, and I didn't want to make it worse. So I kept it." "You kept it for 10 years? I read it sometimes, when things got bad, to remind myself of what I meant, of what we meant. That did something to me, something dangerous, something kind." We stood in silence again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. Not empty, heavy, full. The kind of silence that hums when two hearts start remembering each other. I placed the letter on the table, next to my half-packed suitcase. It felt like a choice. "I used to write letters too," I said. He looked up. You did? Yes, in my journal, but I never gave them to you either. I didn't think you'd want to read them. He smiled, faint, sad. I think that's been our whole problem, hasn't it? We both stopped showing up, stopped letting each other in. The truth of it hurt. It was simple, but it burned. For a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with. Not the tired version shaped by work and silence, but the one who used to make me feel like home. That man was still there, buried under layers of routine and regret. He took a step closer, cautiously, like he was afraid to spook me. Layla, he said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know I never stopped caring. I just forgot how to show it. His voice cracked on the last word, and that tiny break, made my eyes sting, because after years of silence, honesty sounded like music. I don't know what happens next, I whispered. He nodded slowly. Maybe we start by seeing each other again. I exhaled, shaky, but real. Maybe seeing was the beginning. Maybe it always had been. I placed the letter back on the table, and for the first time that night, I sat down. He did the same, across from me, like we were finally meeting again after a very long absence. We didn't solve anything that night. We didn't kiss. We didn't promise forever, but we stayed. And somehow that felt like the bravest thing either of us had done in years. Then he said softly, almost afraid to break the spell, there's something else I need to tell you. Now, before I tell you what I found, let me know if this moment hit you the way it hit me, that quiet ache between love and letting go, and make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Possible Hearts, because what happens next changes everything.
There's something else I need to tell you. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Not from fear, exactly, but from the weight of what could follow. His eyes searched mine, uncertain, almost pleading for permission to continue. I nodded. Go on. He took a deep breath. His hands were clasped together on the table, fingers interlocked so tightly they were turning white. I wasn't just working late all those nights. He began quietly. I told you it was paperwork, clients, deadlines, but that wasn't the full truth. The words hung there, trembling between us. My pulse quickened. 1,000 possible versions of the story flashed through my head, the kind of thoughts that every wife learns to fear but tries not to voice. He saw the look on my face and shook his head quickly. It wasn't another woman, Layla. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until he said it. Then what was it? He leaned back, eyes glassy. I was at the hospital. I frowned. Hospital? You were sick? Not me. He swallowed hard. Someone else. Someone I thought I'd never have to tell you about again. For a long moment, all I could hear was the rain tapping softly against the window. Finally, he said it. My mother. I blinked, confused. Your mother died when we were first married, Peter? You told me you didn't even get to say goodbye. He nodded slowly. That's the part I lied about. My breath caught. He looked down at his hands. She didn't die then. She was alive. Barely. But alive. She had a degenerative condition, early dementia. She didn't want anyone to know. Not even you. She made me promise to keep it a secret until the end. I stared at him, unable to move. You mean, all those nights you said you were working, he said, I was sitting in that hospital room, feeding her, talking to her even when she couldn't remember my name. It took a few seconds for the meaning to sink in. All those silent years, all that distance, he hadn't been cold. He'd been grieving in real time. I sank back in my chair, feeling something heavy but strangely soft unfolding in my chest. Why didn't you tell me? He met my eyes, guilt swimming in his expression. Because I didn't want you to look at me with pity. Or worse, resentment. We'd already lost the baby. You were breaking. I didn't think you could take another heartbreak. I covered my mouth, tears threatening to spill. So instead you decided to carry it all alone. He nodded, yes, and it nearly destroyed me.
The honesty in his voice cut through every wall I'd built. For years, I'd seen him as detached, distant, a man who'd stopped trying. Now I saw him as someone who'd been quietly drowning in the same ocean as me, just on another shore. "You should have trusted me," I whispered. "I know, but I was scared. I thought protecting you meant keeping things from you." He laughed softly, bitterly. Turns out, I was just keeping us from each other. Silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was full of realization, of old grief surfacing and finally breathing. He leaned forward slightly. I visited her every week until the end, and when she finally passed, I didn't tell you then either. I came home that night, sat beside you in bed, and just pretended to sleep. I covered my face with my hands. "God, Peter." He stood and came closer, slow, careful, as if afraid to break the fragile air between us. He stopped in front of me, and for the first time in years, I didn't pull away. His eyes were tired, but there was a strange kind of peace in them. He said quietly, "After she died, I promised myself I'd do better with you, but instead I shut down. It's like I forgot how to feel without breaking." Tears finally spilled over, warm against my skin. It was too much, too sad, too human, too raw. And yet, in that pain, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel like his enemy. I felt like his mirror. I stood up and reached out instinctively, my fingers brushing his arm. It was a small touch, hesitant, almost accidental, but it felt like lightning. He looked down, startled, and then his shoulders dropped. That tiny bit of contact undid him. "I'm so sorry, Layla, for all of it." I nodded, unable to speak. Forgiveness didn't come instantly, but understanding did. And sometimes that's the seed forgiveness grows from. We stood there for a long time, just breathing. The suitcase was still open on the floor, half filled, but I couldn't bring myself to close it or to keep packing. Something inside me whispered that maybe this night wasn't about endings after all. Maybe it was about beginning again, with the truth this time. Before I could say anything, Peter spoke again. "There's one more thing you should know," he said quietly. I looked up, startled. "Another secret?" He hesitated, and then said, "It's about the letter you just read. Because, Layla, I didn't write it for you."
I froze. "What do you mean? You didn't write it for me?" Peter's expression faltered. Guilt, hesitation, and something else flickered behind his eyes. He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice barely audible. He said, "I meant every word, Layla, but when I wrote it, it wasn't addressed to you." The room seemed to shrink. The ticking clock suddenly felt too loud. I waited, every part of me bracing for an answer I wasn't sure I wanted. He finally spoke. He said, "I wrote it to her, to my mother." I stared, speechless. He continued, I was sitting beside her hospital bed. She couldn't speak anymore. I'd been there for hours, trying to say things I didn't know how to say, so I started writing. I wanted her to know that I loved her, that I saw her pain, that I hated how much she was carrying alone. He paused, glancing toward the letter lying on the table, and he said, when I came home that night, I read it again, and it broke me, because somewhere between those lines meant for her, I realized they also belonged to you. The air left my lungs all at once. He went on, his voice shaking. Every word I wrote to her about guilt, distance, helplessness, it was everything I felt about you too, but I didn't know how to face that truth. So I folded the letter and hid it, because it hurt too much to see how alike those two kinds of loss were. His words hit like soft lightning. Quiet, but impossible to ignore. You were grieving both of us, I whispered. He nodded slowly. Yes, and I didn't even realize it until years later. You were alive, Layla, but I treated you like a memory, like someone I'd already lost. I walked toward the table, my eyes fixed on the letter, that fragile piece of paper that had survived a decade of silence. All these years, I'd thought of it as proof of neglect. Now, it felt like proof of something far more complicated. Love, misplaced and misunderstood. You could have told me, I said softly. I would have understood. He looked at me then, really looked, with the kind of raw honesty that strips a person bare. He said, No, Layla, back then you were barely holding yourself together. You smiled for the world, but I could see the cracks. You just lost our child. I couldn't hand you another loss to carry.
Tears slid down my cheeks before I could stop them. I turned away, pressing my hands against the counter just to steady myself. For so long, I had built stories in my mind about why he had drifted away, that he'd stopped loving me, that I wasn't enough. But the truth was quieter, sadder. He hadn't turned away because he didn't care. He turned away because he didn't know how to love and mourn at the same time. And maybe I hadn't known either. Behind me, I heard him move closer. His voice softened. When you packed that suitcase tonight, he said, I thought it was the end. But maybe it's just the first honest night we've had in years. I closed my eyes. I don't know what to do with all this, I whispered. You don't have to do anything, he said. Just don't walk away before we've even tried to understand what's left. There was something in the way he said, what's left, that made my chest ache. Because the truth was, there was something left. Not the fire we once had, not yet, but the faint, stubborn glow that refuses to die even after everything else has burned down. I turned around, slowly. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but softer somehow, like a man stripped of armor. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. When you read that letter all those years, did it make you think of me? He smiled faintly. Every time. Then maybe it was for me after all, I said. He nodded, not to agree, but to accept, and that simple motion felt like forgiveness being born. We stood there, in that small kitchen, surrounded by remnants of a life we had almost given up on. The rain outside had stopped. The world was quiet again. I picked up the letter one last time. The edges were frayed now, worn by too many hands and too many years. But the words still held. They had survived the silence. "Peter," I said softly, "maybe we start there." He frowned slightly. "Where?" "With words, with seeing, with this." I held up the letter. "Maybe we write new ones." He exhaled, a sound half relief, half disbelief. "You'd really want to try again?" "I don't know if I'm ready to love the same way," I admitted. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not meant to love the same way. Maybe we're supposed to love differently this time. Honestly." He took a step forward. The distance between us, emotional, physical, spiritual, seemed to collapse. He reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, trembling, human. He said, "Let's start over," he whispered. "Not from the beginning, but from the truth." We stood there for a while, not speaking, just existing. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like remembering what we'd lost. It felt like discovering what had somehow stayed. Later that night, long after he'd gone upstairs, I sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper and a pen. The suitcase remained open beside me, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I began to write. "Peter, I don't know where this goes, but I want to see you again. Really see you. Not the man who shut me out, not the man I thought I lost, but the one who's still trying." I paused, then added one final line. "Maybe love doesn't die. Maybe it just waits for us to look up again." And for the first time in 10 years, I finally looked up. Morning came softly, like a promise whispered through the curtains. I didn't remember falling asleep. The last thing I recalled was the faint scratching of my pen and the sound of Peter's footsteps creaking upstairs. Now the house felt different. Not alive, not yet, but awake. I sat up on the couch, my neck stiff from the angle I'd slept in. The letter I'd written him was still on the table, folded neatly beside a cup of untouched tea. For a moment, I just stared at it, wondering if I should hide it or let him find it. Then I realized this was the first morning in years that I didn't feel the weight of pretending. The floorboards creaked again, and there he was, standing at the edge of the living room, his hair a mess, his face drawn but peaceful. He held 2 mugs of coffee. "Good morning," he said. His voice was quiet, unsure. "Morning." He set one mug on the table beside my letter. His eyes flicked toward it, but didn't ask. He finally said, "I wasn't sure if you'd still be here." Neither was I. He gave a faint, nervous laugh, the kind of sound that tries to bridge years of unspoken things. We sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee that was more symbolic than good. Then, softly, he said, "I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about everything you said, about how we stopped seeing each other." I looked up. And
I realized I don't even know what your favorite coffee is anymore. It was such a simple confession, so painfully ordinary that I almost cried. Still the same, I whispered. Too much cream, not enough sugar. He smiled. Good, I'll remember that. Outside, the world was waking up. Cars passing, birds breaking the silence, sunlight catching on the window pane. Inside, we were learning how to breathe again. Do you remember, he asked, the day we moved into this house? Of course I do. You were barefoot and you said you could feel the history in the floors. You said that we were adding our story to it. I did say that. I smiled faintly. He leaned back in the chair. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that this was our story. I started living like it was just mine. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The acknowledgement itself felt like a bridge between us. After breakfast, we moved around the house like people rediscovering old territory, opening drawers, touching photos, not saying much. In the bedroom, I noticed the half-packed suitcase. It looked strangely out of place now, like an artifact from a version of me that no longer existed. Peter stood in the doorway. Are you staying? I turned toward him, hand resting on the open zipper. I'm not leaving today. That's all I know. He nodded. That's enough.
Later, we walked outside together. The rain had washed everything clean. The sky was pale and open, the kind of blue that feels like forgiveness. We didn't hold hands, not yet. But we walked close enough that our sleeves brushed now and then. Every small touch felt monumental. He broke the silence. I found something last night, after you went to sleep. I said, what was it? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph, creased and faded. It was from the day our daughter was born. I froze. He said, I kept it in my wallet all these years, but I didn't know how to show you without breaking down. I took the picture from him carefully. There we were, exhausted, crying, smiling at a tiny bundle between us. I whispered, she had your nose. He nodded, and your eyes. For a long time, we just stood there, looking at that picture. Two people who had loved deeply, lost deeply, and somehow found themselves back at the same door. He said softly, I think I forgot that healing isn't about moving on. It's about remembering without breaking. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw not the man who hurt me, but the man who had been hurting beside me. I said, maybe that's what marriage really is. Not endless happiness, but choosing to stay and heal even when it hurts. He reached for my hand. This time, I didn't hesitate. Our fingers intertwined, tentative but real. I felt a small pulse of warmth, like hope sneaking back in. He whispered, I finally see, Layla. And for the first time, I believed him. That night, we didn't talk much. We just existed in the same space, cooking, listening to soft music, laughing a little when the pasta boiled over. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. And maybe that was enough. Before bed, I found him sitting on the porch, looking at the stars. I asked, can I sit? He said, always. I sat beside him, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. After a while, he said, I don't want to make promises I can't keep anymore. I just want to be honest, even when it's ugly. I said, "That's all I want too." We sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was full. I looked up at the night sky, the same one that had watched us fall apart and now watched us try again. And in that quiet moment, I realized something simple but profound. We weren't starting over. We were continuing from the middle, from the mess, from the real parts love is made of. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems it.
It's been 3 weeks since the night I packed my bags. The suitcase still sits in the corner of our bedroom, half open, half forgotten. Peter calls it our reminder not to forget how close we came to losing everything. Sometimes I think he's right. Sometimes I think it's my reminder that staying can be an act of bravery too. The days since then haven't been magical. We still argue about bills, about dishes, about who forgot to turn off the coffee maker. But now when the silence comes, it doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like space. Space to breathe, to think, to try again. Peter started leaving small notes for me. Nothing dramatic, just quiet gestures. I liked your laugh this morning. Dinner was perfect. I see you. 3 simple words that once changed everything. Now, a daily promise he keeps in handwriting. And slowly, I'm doing the same. We're not erasing the past. We're writing over it together. Yesterday, I found the old letter again, the one that started it all. It had fallen between the pages of a book I hadn't touched in years. I sat on the floor, rereading it. This time, I didn't cry, because I finally understood something I couldn't before, that love doesn't vanish when neglected. It just waits for courage. And sometimes courage looks like staying. That evening, we went out for dinner, something we hadn't done in forever. The restaurant wasn't fancy. There was music, candlelight, and people laughing around us. Peter reached across the table and took my hand. It still surprised me how familiar it felt. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think saving our marriage meant fixing everything that broke. And now?" I asked. "Now I think it means forgiving what broke and building new things around it." I smiled. "That's a very Peter way of saying you've changed." He grinned. "I'm trying." We talked for hours about little things, old dreams, even the idea of traveling again. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You still tap your fingers when you're nervous." I laughed. "And you still notice." That simple exchange hit deeper than any apology ever could, because being seen, truly seen, is the rarest form of love. When we got home, I walked into the bedroom and finally zipped the suitcase closed. Peter looked confused. "You're not leaving, are you?" I smiled. "No, I'm just putting it away." He watched as I slid it under the bed, where it belonged, not forgotten, but no longer threatening. He said, "That's good." It was starting to feel like a ghost. I said, "Maybe ghosts disappear when you stop running from them." He nodded, stepped closer, and kissed my forehead. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It was something better. It was peace. That night, as I lay beside him, listening to his breathing, I thought about all the ways we could have ended, and all the ways we didn't. People often say love fades with time, but maybe it doesn't fade at all. Maybe it just needs to be rediscovered under layers of hurt, silence, and fear. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Not pretending it didn't hurt, but choosing to see love underneath the hurt anyway. If someone asked me now, why did I stay? I'd tell them the truth. I stayed because 3 words reminded me that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about quiet awakenings. It's about finally being seen and daring to see back. Sometimes we wait for miracles to fix our hearts, but I think the real miracle is when 2 tired people decide to try again. Because that night, I didn't stay out of fear. I stayed because, for the first time in a long time, I believed something could bloom again. Something honest. Something real. And maybe that's what love really means. What do you think? Maybe this story reminded you that healing takes time, but it's never too late to see each other again. So if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps more people find stories like this one. Tell me in the comments what country or city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Possible Hearts for more real stories about love, loss, and second chances. Because here we believe that real stories, real hearts, real possibilities.